where do we want to go, thinking January 6th, where do we want to be at the end of our time together January 6th, and what would need to happen between then and January 6th to get us there. So one of the things that we thought we might do would be to demonstrate what it would sound like to have a reflective planning conversation between somebody who's planning for the conceptual understanding pieces of an upcoming unit of study with a partner who's just going to be reflecting questions back at them. Not necessarily, I'm not doing planning on my own, I'm going to be talking through Susan's planning, so she's kind of going to be thinking aloud to you about what it's going to sound like for her to come up with two or three sentences in kid language that reflect the conceptual understanding in her next unit of study. Of course, because she's our science girl, she picked science, which would have been the last thing on my list, but that's okay.
And I would say that one of the things we talked about was that I might be more reluctant than some to go into CAT because I've taught the units for a few years, and the importance of visiting it, both to see what's not there, even if you might choose to teach it that year because it's what you really want to teach for a year and you're going to let go of, but also to have that kind of that idea of what's the big picture and concept that you know you want them to walk away with, not this week, not next week, but maybe 6 weeks from now, so you're always anchoring back to that as you're planning and teaching.
So today what we did was specified what our learning goal was for the day. You guys should have this handout, what the performance of understanding is, and then you have 3 success criteria. So by the time we're done today, you should all be able to do the 3 things that are shown in the success criteria. And we're going to actually do them, part of them, side by side right now. And then I did part 3 of the success criteria for your adult learning. So when you all started this journey, it was during instructional rounds. During instructional rounds, your problem of practice was centered around learning goals. And then where was your building with respect to learning goals? You gathered some data, you decided where you wanted to be, and we knew that at the end of the time, in January, at the end of the PD on January 6th, we wanted to have you be in a position where you could begin writing learning goals for your classroom. So we backtracked from what do you know now, looked at the targets for the staff meeting we did in November. We've got now a goal and a target and some success criteria for today. We'll have something else that we'll determine based on the formative assessments from today, where you guys land today, that will get us to this last piece, which is our big learning goal. So this is your trajectory. It's taking you from what do you know now, what steps are needed to get from here to here, which is where you're headed. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's your adult learning trajectory. And we're going to start to think about what it might look to have it in kid language in your classroom if you were to have a trajectory for your students. So we're going to now set the stage for what it might sound like to have that kind of a conversation. So Susan, I know that planning is a little like a journey. When you look at your CCAP documents, it's kind of a bird's eye view of what you want kids to be able to know, understand, and be able to do at the end of a unit. The destination are those end of unit outcomes. So before we came together today, what did you do in your CCAP to sort of get a sense for what the big picture there?
Well, I definitely like to look at the overarching essential questions. And then while I appreciate that the district puts it down into what we will understand, know, and do, sometimes I find that bogs me down into like the what lessons I need to find. So I also like to look at the standards and make sure that I even agree that what they are saying relates to the standard that we're supposed to be relating back to.
Okay, so which unit are you looking at today?
I'm looking at earth processes and surface of the earth.
And when you started looking at that unit overview, what important ideas did you notice? What jumped out at you?
Well, definitely jumped out at me that a lot of this stuff, as I knew, I kind of had to mourn the rocks are gone, the deep understanding of the 3 types of rocks. There's definitely some things that remain as far as rock cycle and rocks layers and plate tectonics. So those are all things I'm really comfortable with. So I was always excited to get to see that. The big things that kind of push out to me are the hows how do scientists understand and how do we know what we know as scientists and what evidence proves what, supports what we know.
So, as you were talking to me, I noticed that you've already reflected a little bit about what you've done in the past, that you're trying to let go of some of the things that you no longer see reflected there. Sort of thinking about your past practices and how they reflect the ideas that you see in the CAP now. Do you think that your students have knowledge or learning that's going to help them with what you see is new for them?
Yeah, more so than ever, but that's also been from talking to Stephanie and this year even seeing what Mr. Biller is doing with them. So I know they're gonna be coming in with a little bit more than they have in the past around plate tectonics as well as erosion and weathering. But in our conversations as teachers, I know that my focus is not gonna be just on what is it, but how do we know that these processes are occurring? What evidence exists on our planet?
So then you're starting to think a little bit about stage one. I can see you referring to it there. What connections can you make between the big ideas, the overarching understandings, and then the really nitty-gritty sort of know, understand, and do pieces? What do you see as the connections there, and how will you articulate those to kids?
Well, I mean, I think for me, and it's sort of my years of having taught it, every piece that we add on to our layers of understanding gets kids to be able to interpret the science. So whether it's the section where we're studying types of rocks, it's not really just about knowing about rocks, but it's being able to, like I like to say to kids, hear the rocks whisper the history of Earth. So ultimately, they can do that themselves. And that we're not just studying that plate tectonics exists, but again, what do the scientists use, what data they use to support a theory?
So as you're starting to talk about those connections, it sounds like there are some chunks of learning that you're starting to identify that you want kids to be able to walk away with. Can you articulate for me what those big chunks of learning are?
Well, I have, because I like to put big sentence stems up on my wall, and that's as much for the kids to be able to look back at when we go over the vocabulary. But it makes me really purposefully say, like, we're learning this so that eventually we can do this. And I think it's that idea that you have there, that each lesson is ultimately gonna get us to our top spot. So for me, I think that the three big ideas, the big picture ideas are that I can hear rocks whisper the history of Earth. I understand that scientists use observable data to support scientific theories, and that Earth's surface is always changing, and I feel like I need to articulate that connection to proof. Like, I have proof that Earth's surface is always changing.
Okay, and those three chunks, do they need to come in any particular order, or are they woven together?
Oh, they do. Well, I think you can teach them in different orders, but I mean, I'll have the order I'll teach them in this year. We'll start with scientists use observable data, and that'll prove to us that the Earth's surface is always changing, and then we move into hearing the whispers of rocks.
Okay. So you've looked at the unit overview, you started to look at the KUDs and the overarching understandings. So tell me what you'll do next now to make sure that kids understand what you understand, what you've articulated to me as your understanding. Do you tell me how you post things, how you refer back to that?
Yep.
How do you articulate those to kids?
So I have two parts on my wall. I have one part where I have I guess a lot of people call it the essential question, and so for the big idea, the big concept. So those are on sentence stems, and then I'll build the vocabulary wall as we move along. And a lot of times I'll anchor the lesson at the beginning, just where have we been, and then refer back to this is where we're going, as well as using my daily goals if they can directly connect, or sometimes they're, we're kind of far from the end point, so they might not see the direct connection.
Okay. So it's tempting, I think, in the work that you're doing as a staff to get excited about articulating learning goals. Rather than jump straight into that, why do you feel this is such an important thing to do first before you start articulating the daily learning goals for kids?
Because for me, when I plan and when I teach, I just find it really powerful to have them up on the wall and to really have my head in where's the big place I want to go. Because it's so fun and easy for me to get caught up in the nitty-gritty and discuss like how it is those holes got captured in that piece of scoria. Like, really? but I find that fascinating. But ultimately, we want to understand how the holes got caught in the piece of scoria so that we are able to hear the whisper of Earth's history and know that there was actually a volcano here at one point that has been uplifted to the top of the mountain, which was caused by plate tectonics and all goes back. So I think it just helps me get out of the nitty-gritty and into the big concept, and also form those more purposeful, and not always so purposeful, but those bigger, higher order thinking questions and conversations.
Okay. Is there anything else about your planning so far? So you're planning for the conceptual understandings and big ideas. You've done, I think, a really great job of putting them in kid language. If I was a student, those would be easy for me to grasp and understand. Is there anything else about your planning or your thinking during this stage of planning that you want to tell me?
I just want to tell you it's a whole lot easier when I've already taught a unit. And if I'm teaching something for the first time, I usually can't tell you what the big idea is until I've gotten to the end.
Okay. It's a little muddier.
It's a lot muddier, and so sometimes these will come about after the fact, or be added, or not happen at all until 3 weeks later when I go, wow, missed that boat.
So what would happen if you took a stab at articulating something and then you realized you either needed to reword it for kids or add to it? What would you do? If it is something you've taught for the first time.
I believe I would reword it or add to it.
So just,
yeah,
kids know it's a work in progress and
yeah.
this is where you're going.
Yeah, or they could add to it, I suppose. I don't think that's one of my great strengths,
Okay.
is letting them add to it, but I think that would be really cool to do.
Okay, and tell me about the sentence strips.
So, I don't know, like we brought these today, you guys, because I know in my class, I love the sentence strip, so I'll put my big sentences on them and just put them up and my words on them, and I like my weird ways that I organize the words, like in little outlines and stuff. So this is how I build, and you're always welcome to come look at them. My vocabulary wall, sometimes it's just kind of therapeutic because you make little pictures and stuff. So we have these. And then I noticed in Mr. Biller's room, and I think also in Dawn's room, they tend to use more the chart paper to write them on. So we just thought, rather than sitting around just talking about it, if you had an idea of your next big concept that you were going to choose to reach towards as you're planning, you could make a really pretty strip and make a little sentence.
Where do you buy those things from?
In the front office. We request them from Kathy, and they do a good job. Sometimes I'll just cut, or sometimes I'll just cut up, like, she gave me old ABC charts that nobody had been using, so I just cut them in half. I have a parent that goes home and writes words for my word wall, so. I know it's good to have kids write it, I get that, and if you have that down already, how kids contribute to your word wall, I say go with it, but it was never a strength of mine, so I do like to have a vocabulary wall that builds over time. Yes, it is nice if they can read it, and it's even nicer when nobody knows that it's actually from your previous unit, it's still hanging up there if it looks good.
Okay, so if you guys refer back to the learning goal, performance of understanding and success criteria for today, what you've seen us model is check 1 and check 2, which was review in stage 1 and the unit overview in CCAP, reflecting on the information by following this planning protocol that's on the other side of your learning goal sheet, two-sided copy. I asked certain reflective questions of Susan. Ideally, you have a planning partner you can do that with. Sometimes you can't because it's midnight, you're sitting at your kitchen table. So it's okay to ask yourself these questions, because I know sometimes we plan like that too. But there's a resource for you to be able to do that. And then you heard Susan say 3 different sentences that captured the conceptual understandings for her upcoming unit in language that she knew her students would be able to understand. We haven't yet seen her create a visual that illustrates what that trajectory is, but she's going to work on that while you are all working on the check 1 and check 2. But you do have a visual that I created that could be something you create. It could look different. It could be a mountain. It could be a flow map. It could be whatever you want it to be, so that there is a beginning, a conceptual destination, and then places for your learning targets along the way. You'll notice we have 2 learning targets there now because we've done that, but Susan isn't going to have any because she's not to that place in her planning yet where she's specifying what those learning targets are. She's really just at this is where we are now and this is our destination. So do you have any questions about what you just saw or what your task is next? So you can certainly work with a planning partner if that's what you'd like to do. If it's easier for you to work on your own, that's fine too. We have about how long do we have, Kurt?
We have until 4:10.
Okay, so we have about a half an hour of time for you to dig into the unit overview and stage one of an upcoming unit for you. And we'll just be around to support.